Here's what I actually needed to keep bees. Not what the store wants to sell you, but what you'll actually use. Hey everyone, I'm Jacob with the Everyday Beekeeper, and today we're going to be talking about the gear and tools that you need to keep bees. First thing we want to talk about is the hive placement and location. You're typically going to want an area that has good protection from wind, but also has adequate sunlight. In my case, the wind typically comes from the west right over these dirt piles. So situating my hives in front of them provides a good wind block for them. Another thing you want to consider is sunlight. Adequate sunlight is important to your hive because it's going to allow the bees to get up and fly sooner and be more productive. You're going to want to face your hives to the east, and this allows for when the sun comes up in the morning for it to get maximum impact on your hives. Another thing you're going to want to consider is the color of your hives. If you're in the northeast, you're going to want a darker hive that allows the heat from the sun to warm it up. Another thing you want to consider in your location is your proximity to people. You don't want to put your hives in a high traffic area where people are going to be walking directly in front of the entrance of the hives, or maybe it's near a neighbor's house. So be mindful when you're choosing your location. Find an area, if possible, with the least amount of traffic, the most amount of protection from the wind and elements, but also direct and good sunlight. If the hives can face the east, that's preferable. There are many different areas that you can keep your hives. In my case, I chose gravel to put them on. I put a weed barrier underneath, and you can see that there's a couple weeds coming up. It's not totally foolproof. You'll have to take care of that, but that's not a big deal. I just didn't want an area that I was going to have to be weed whacking and mowing around constantly, because especially if you're using a gas-powered engine or something that makes a lot of noise, or especially a zero turn that's going to be vibrating the ground or shaking the hives, they don't like that and they'll be chasing you. So in my case, mine is positioned right off the edge of the field. So really, I just have to push mow this little area in front of the hives, and the rest I really don't have to worry about. If I need to, I could weed whack as well. But you want to make it as low maintenance as possible. I just use some T-posts and some stakes to get the rest of the hive protected and covered. So after you have the surface figured out of where you're actually going to put the apiary, the next thing you need to think about is, what are my hives going to sit on? And that's your hive stands. In my case, I used a simple 2x6 stand that I custom made, and mine is 10 feet wide. Sits about 16 to 18 inches off the ground, and that allows enough clearance that you're not going to have any small critters or animals be able to get into and touch the bees as well. I only have 2 hives at the moment, but my stand is 10 feet wide. And I also made it the depth of the stand so that when I'm working on the bees and I need to pull a frame out, I'm able to set that frame in between or on the edges of my stand. And that allows for much easier access when you're inspecting the hives to be able to put your frames down and not worry about them of where you're going to put them as well. My stand has 6 2x6 legs that sits on concrete blocks. And that was just a stability thing. For me, I wanted it to be as level and nice as possible, and that's worked out pretty well. Now that we have the hive stand built, the next thing you want to think about is your electric fence. How are you going to secure the hive? Now, you might be in an area where you don't deal with bears or any other animals that could get into it, but where I'm at, bears are a big problem, and when they get into a hive, they can destroy everything. So it's very important for me to have protection for my hive. I used T-posts that are 5 feet tall. When they're pounded into the ground, they're about 38 to 40 inches high. And then I needed a 4-strand wire, and I tied all of them together, and I electrified it as well. And I use a solar charger and a battery that's tied in, and that keeps my my fence charged and going strong. But ideally, if you could have a plug-in or wired connection, that's going to be your best bet, because I come out here periodically and I check, but it's just one thing that you don't want to have fail and you not know about it and have an animal get in. Another thing when you're thinking about your apiary and your placement is you really want the fence to be big enough so that an animal can't just come up to the side and immediately touch it without touching the fence. For example, you'll notice that my hives are recessed on all sides of the fence by a couple feet, and that allows or prevents a bear from just coming up over the side and touching the hive or ripping it apart. You would have to crash over the fence, hopefully get shocked before being able to do any damage or destruction. So another thing to consider. And typically, I would say go bigger than what you think you're going to need, because you could have a couple swarms in 1 year and you're going to need that extra space for the hives. And you don't know how much your hives are going to expand over the years. So try to future proof it. It'll save you a lot of headache down the road. So now that we have our fence, the base that our hives are going to sit on, next thing we need are the boxes that are going to house the hive itself. And there are a couple different layers of the hive. In my case, you'll notice there's the base, and that's that slanted bottom piece that the entire hive sits on. That just gets it up a little bit further and provides another layer of protection against any animal or intruder that's going to be coming up from the bottom. Sitting on top of that, which you'll see is right in the entrance, and that's where the bees come in and out, that's called the screened bottom board. And what that does is that provides a couple things. One, in the summer, it could provide a little ventilation for when the hive overheats. And there's also a removable tray that you can pull out, and that allows you to see if you have any mites or other things. It kind of gives you an indication on how the hive's doing. So sitting on top of the screen bottom board is the deep box. You can get different variation of boxes, whether they're 8 or 10 frames. In my case, they're 10 frames per box, and your deep box is going to be just over 9 inches tall is the frame length or frame height that is going to sit inside of it. And what the deeps are, you notice that I have two boxes on each hive. The deep box is your brood box, and that's the heart of the hive. That's where the queen's going to be laying eggs. That's going to be where the larva is stored and where new bees are going to be hatched from. And that's the lifeblood of the hive, the inner workings of the hive to keep it running smooth. Sitting on top of that, you'll notice I have smaller boxes, and those are called the honey supers. They sit, the frames inside them about 6.5 inches, and that's where your honey's going to be. Typically, you'll put a queen separator in between the brood box and the honey super, and what this does is it prevents the queen from coming up into the honey super to lay eggs, but allows the worker bees to come up and to store their honey. Then on top of either the honey super or the brood box, depending on how built up and strong your hive is going to be the inner cover. And all it is a board with a circle on the inside or some type of opening. And in my case, I use it as a reducer where I put my sugar water on top and I feed the bees through when they're needing that, usually in early spring or over winter. And it's a good spot to feed them. And then just put a honey super box around that and over top of it so that the jar fits inside. And lastly, you're going to have the cover to the hive, the lid, and that just protects the hive from the elements. Typically, it's a little bit bigger than the boxes to force the water away from the sides of the hive. And then I just throw a big heavy rock on top of it as well, because we get a lot of wind here, and as protected as my hives are, you want to make sure that they're as strong against a big gust or a storm and that they don't blow over. If you have one blow over, that would be really bad. Another thing to consider in all of this is the boxes that I got didn't come in this color. I painted them after I got them. The colors that you're going to want to avoid are red and black. Bees don't like those colors, so anything other than that is a good thing. If you're in the south or somewhere where it's warmer, probably want to stick to a lighter color. But where I am, we're going to want a darker color. And I just used a deck stain, a deck sealer, which is brown, and that provides great protection for the wood, prevents it from rotting for a really long time. You don't paint the inside, just the outside. You don't want to affect the bees with that. and it's also a dark color, which allows the heat from the sun to radiate and heat that hive up quicker, at least in those early morning hours of the day, to warm that hive up and get them active and flying as soon as possible. And then after you have all that and your boxes are made and ready, you need the bees. You can order bees in either a package or a nuke. A package is just a cluster of bees with the queen inside. Literally can come in a bag or a box, and you just dump it out, and there they are. I haven't got a package. When I got my hives this spring, I got nukes. And what they are is a fully functional and formed bee colony. It typically has about 4 to 5 frames inside, with the queen, with laying eggs, with worker bees, and everything ready to go. And when you get them, they come in a small box, and then you're able to just pull those 5 frames out, put them in the center of your new brood box, and then put your new frames on the outside, and you're ready to go, and they'll build into that. So nukes, I think, are the better way to go, but that's when you get started, and when that hive is just forming, so something to consider. The next thing to think about is, what protection are you going to use to take care of your bees? Different beekeepers you'll see all over the place, they'll either wear nothing, they'll either just have a veil over their head to protect their face, they'll have just a jacket, or maybe they have a full suit from head to toe. This is really all dependent on how comfortable you are. When I first got these nukes this spring, I was picking them up, and they were totally sealed in their box, and I went to go grab them, and I didn't have a suit on. The guy I picked them up from didn't have the suit on. No one did. I picked them up, and the lid wasn't screwed down. It was on the back of this guy's tailgate. I pulled the nuke over, the lid flew off, it dumped over, the frames fell out, bees went everywhere. I went running. I got stung on my hand twice, and I got stung right in the tear duct of my eye, which blew up uh, crazy. I had to take a day off of work from it. So I highly recommend wearing protection, just as a precaution. It only takes one bee to be a little bit angry to ruin your day or even a couple of days. And a lot of times the swelling doesn't happen immediately. You go to sleep, you wake up the next day, that's when the swelling hits. And that's what happened to me. So what I'd recommend is at least having the suit jacket. And all this is, there's different veils that you can get. Mine's round, kind of allows some better viewing angles when you have it on. But all it is just a jacket that zips up. It's got an elastic waist, which you can tighten, and typically I wear jeans. I don't wear anything else. I just have jeans that cover sneakers or boots and really don't allow gaps for bees to come up or crawl up an arm or a leg. That's not a good thing. So the elastic waistband really helps keep it tight to your clothes. And then you're going to put the veil on. That sits like that. And then I would just zip all this up and Velcro it down. Then the only other thing you're going to need is some type of glove. We could go into all the different gloves that are out there. In my case, I use these. They're ventilated gloves. And if you're looking for suits, typically you're going to be working on the bees in warmer weather. And you want to make sure that your suit and your gloves are ventilated. These are, which make it very handy when taking care of the bees, just a little bit extra airflow. You know, a lot of times you could be out here in weather that's 70, 80, 90 degrees. And if there's no breeze, it makes it very, very hot. Sometimes inspecting the bees can take 20 minutes. Sometimes it takes an hour, depending on what you need. My gloves are goatskin leather, so get a size that fits your hand. Don't go bigger because these will stretch to your hand. And then the same thing, there's just a Velcro here that ties around your arm to make a tight seal so that a bee can't crawl in. The next thing we want to talk about is some of the tools that you're going to need to take care of your hive. And one of the first things is your smoker. Bees communicate through what's called a pheromone, which is basically a scent that moves through the hive. What the smoker does is it disrupts that scent and it calms the bees down when they're maybe getting agitated. And I always take the smoker with me. I light it, but I don't always use it. I always go as long as I can without using it because I want to be as least disruptive to the hive as possible. Some people overuse the smoker, and as soon as they open the hive up, they're blasting the bees with smoke. But I just prefer to be as gentle as possible and only use the smoke if they're very agitated, or maybe if you have a nuke and you're placing them into the hive for the first time, that will be helpful to use. And we'll go over the smoker, what to put in it. I use wood shavings in mine, but we'll go over that further in another video on how to properly use a smoker. So I only have 3 tools besides the smoker, which I try not to use as much as possible. This one, and probably is the least used one of mine, and that is the bee brush. What this is going to allow you to do is to gently brush bees off of a frame when you're inspecting it. Maybe you need to look deeper at something, or maybe you're pulling a frame out, or you're extracting, you want to get all the bees off, and just gives you more flexibility to look into the hive a little bit more. This one, this is my frame grabber. There's a little flat edge, like a flathead screwdriver you can pry with on this one. And this just comes in, wraps around the frame, and allows you to pull it and hang on to it with one hand. And it's very nice and easy. Sometimes it's hard with the gloves to get your fingers in and grab the frame. And this just allows you to pull it out. And it's one of my favorite tools. Lastly, this is your hive tool, and this is truly going to be your best friend. There's many functions, there's different models of these, but the biggest thing that this is going to do is allow you to pry the frames open from each other, or even to pry the frames up. See, what the bees do in the hive and on the frames is they use propolis, which is basically a cleansing agent and a glue that they use to stick everything together and make more wax connections. So this end of the tool is going to allow you to come in up under a frame and to pull it up, and just to break that wax layer free. And then this other end allows you to go in and pry. Maybe you need to push a frame over, or maybe you're pulling a whole box out and you need to pry in between the boxes to break it loose. I mentioned earlier about painting your boxes. And when you do that, when the boxes sit on top of each other, there's a little bit of layer of paint that hits each other, and it can create a seal. It can be very tight. In that case, you need to get in and pry them open to get your boxes apart. But those are all the tools I use: the smoker, this hive tool, the frame grabber, and occasionally I'll need to use the bee brush to scrape a bee off of something. But you don't need 20 different things. You don't need all the accessories. You just need everything that I've mentioned, and that's your suit, your gloves, and some of these tools, and you're going to be set. Sure, there are things to make it more easier, to make it more convenient, but if you're just getting started in beekeeping, this is going to be the tool you need, number one, and a few more after that. So all I have here is a mason jar, and this is what I feed the bees sugar water in, either in early spring or over the winter, to help them survive. It gives them a little boost while the nectar and the pollen outside is low, and it just gives them more energy to continue to build the hive. This is just a pint mason jar. The lid on it, just take a small nail, and you're going to poke some holes into it, just enough so that when you screw this on and flip it over, it's just going to ever so slightly drip out of that, and the bees are going to come up through that inner cover into that top box, and they're going to feed off of that. Now, there are different things that you can feed your bees with. In my case, the simplest and easiest is 1 cup of sugar and 1 cup of water. Mix it up really good, put your lid on, flip it over, put it in, and let the bees take care of it. And then one piece of tech I use to make my hives a little bit smarter is this security camera. And this is totally optional. This is not anything you need. But I was able to get Wi-Fi out here off my garage with an access point to boost the signal out here. And I put this security camera in, and it rotates, and it's able to zoom up and down. And all this does is it allows me to view the bees remotely. This is purely a want, not a need. But if I'm at work and I want to see, oh, it's a hot day, how much traffic do we have on the hives? Kind of gives me an early indicator of how they're doing without having to physically walk out here every time. See, like I mentioned earlier, you only need one bee to ruin it. So we got a little too close and we had a guard bee come out and fly, but I escaped. I didn't get stung. But this just allows me with the security camera to keep a closer eye on the hive and to see what it's doing and what's going on. So it's not something you need, but it's a cool addition. And if you have a couple extra bucks and you can do it, it would be fun. And another thing I thought is if I ever had an issue with an animal or a bear or something coming in to attack the hive, I'd at least be able to get it on a camera and see what's going on. So that's it. That's the real list of what you actually need to get started beekeeping. You don't need everything that a store will sell you. You just need that simple list to get started. And the nice thing about beekeeping is you can grow as you go. You don't need to have everything perfect when you get started. Everyone has a way of doing things that might be a little bit better or a different tool or something that works for them. You need to find what works for you and go with that. So thanks for tagging along. I'm going to be making a future video on everything that I just listed, but with the budget. How much money does it take to actually start a hive? And I'm going to put numbers from my receipts and from what I did in my setup to tell you how much money it's actually going to take to have bees. So let me know what gear you have or what tools you use if there's anything different. Throw it in the comments and I'd be happy to see what you have. If you like this video, please subscribe and go check out my last video where I killed the queen in one of my hives to actually make it healthier. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.